Hi, Anna, and welcome to Authorlink today to discuss your fabulous debut novel and mystery thriller. How are you feeling today?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, we're really well here, and we're very excited to talk to you about this amazing feat, Reese Witherspoon um, highlighted novel for January. One of the favorites on her list on her bedside table, which is a pretty amazing feat. So tell us a little bit about your story.
So it's called The House in the Pines, and it's my first novel. It is, like you said, a mystery thriller about a young woman who, with a difficult past, who is trying to move on with her life. She lives in Boston with a loving partner, but when she sees a video of her ex-boyfriend across from a young woman at a diner, and the young woman drops over dead, Maya, our main character, is reminded of a similar incident from her own past. So her best friend in high school 7 years ago also dropped dead while talking to this man, Frank. So Maya, she has to go back to her hometown and confront him, but more specifically, she has to return to his house in the Pines. And sort of the central mysteries surrounding that house and what happened there one night.
Well, it's very provocative, and we understand that you had this image of this house on the pines from when you were about 11 years old, and it kind of percolated in your mind for many, many years until you decided to write about it. In fact, it was, I think, and correct me if this is wrong, a story that you had based. One of the short stories that you had based it on was for a contest for your local library. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. So I was 11 and I was the new girl in town. I had just moved to Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and I was a huge reader. So I was spending a lot of time at the library, and that was how I learned about a children's writing contest that they were hosting. And the prize was a gift card to a local bookstore.
Mm.
So that was my impetus to become a writer. At first. I just really wanted to win that gift card and get more
Wow,
books.
that's great.
And I was, yeah, and at the time I was reading a lot of Christopher Pike and R.L. Stein's Fear Street series. So I didn't know how to write, but I was a huge reader. So I just sat down, and I think the first thing that came to me was kind of almost like Fear Street fan fiction, where it was about a girl about my age who gets lost in the woods of Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and stumbles upon this creepy house. So that was my first story. I didn't win the contest. And 20 years went by before I sat down to write my novel. And when I did, I again was sort of learning how to write a novel. I'd written short fiction, I'd written a lot of poetry, but this was my first shot at writing a novel. And I went in, and the first thing that came to me was that house again. So, in a lot
Wow.
of ways, this book is the exploration of that house and the sort of the mystery of that house has always been there. So a lot of the book was
Right.
built around.
Kind of untangling it, kind of like a beacon, I suppose, for your future self. Um,
Yeah.
what was in your family sorry, who in your family influenced your love of reading, or was there nobody really a big reader in your family?
Definitely my mother. She's a big reader. She was getting her PhD in English literature actually at UT
Oh, how
Austin. I
wonderful.
was Yeah, when I was just a few years old. So I grew up, with her in the background typing away on her dissertation, which was on T.S. Eliot. And there was
Mm.
always books in the house. There was really never a time when I couldn't find something to read, even if the thing that I was reading was The Stranger by Camus. I read that when I was probably way too young to understand it.
Yeah,
But it was a short book and the cover was interesting, and my mom had left it around the house. So it was fair
right.
game. I read it.
Yeah.
um,
Or Helter
so yeah,
Skelter, I think, as well. I seem to have picked up somewhere you read that quite young as well.
which one?
Helter Skelter.
Oh, I did. I did read Helter Skelter. I don't know where yeah, I loved that book.
Mm.
I think I was maybe 12 when I read that, and I was just so gripped, and
Right.
I was I was horrified. It
Yeah,
was
of
so
course.
scary to me. And yet I felt compelled just the same way that I feel compelled or felt compelled and still do to find out what happens, like, what's going to
Yeah,
happen.
yeah,
And that
absolutely.
had a series of pictures in the middle that I still remember very clearly, looking at those pictures and kind of puzzling over the scenes of these horrible crimes.
Yeah.
And yeah, absolutely, just feeling totally obsessed
Yeah.
at a
Yeah.
very young age with
The
things like
dread
that.
and distress. I in fact allow my daughter to read anything she wants. That's not to say I allow her to see anything she wants. So yeah, I don't mind that she's reading it so much as she's viewing it. But so that's interesting. So you always were a book lover and a reader. So did you always want to be a writer?
I didn't. I knew that I liked to write and that sometimes I would, write poems and things like that when I was younger. But when I went to my undergrad at UMass Amherst, I really didn't know what I wanted to study. So I started off in the journalism major, and I liked it, but I realized, as I was writing my first stories, this isn't really the kind of writing I want to do. So I
Yeah.
didn't know what I wanted to do, and I switched over to the communications major because there was a few classes in that major that I really wanted to take. So I graduated. I ended up moving to Los Angeles, where I became a script reader. Um,
Wow.
so yeah, that was. I had a friend who that was his job, and I was like, that seems really cool. So I decided to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just kind of, throughout all of my 20s, it was just kind of, doing that, and I had a few different jobs. And when I got laid off from my script reader job at a talent agency, I was like, I think it's time. I want to start taking my writing more seriously. And also, I needed a job. So
Yeah.
it seemed like a good time to think about going back to school. And I did. I went back to LSU in Louisiana. And that was where I wrote the thesis. So it took me a long time. I was 29. I turned 30 in my first year of the program. So it took a little while for me to take writing or take myself seriously enough, I think, to believe I could do that.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I mean, I think it's life and the world as we know it with all that's been going on in history in the last immediate history anyway is a lot more flexible when it comes to boxes and genres and the age that you should be writing your first novel. So I don't think it really matters anymore, whether you've just been, coming out of university and written this brilliant novel or whether you're 93 and writing a brilliant novel. So it's all good
Yeah.
when you've been experiencing. So were there any challenges in trying to find an agent or a publisher later on, or once you had written your thesis slash first novel?
Finding an agent was, I mean, that's always a whole can of worms, I think, for writers, because it involves sending out query letters, unless you know someone. You're sending out query letters to people who don't know you and don't know your writing. So it's really challenging to try to craft
Mm,
that letter that's going to stand out among, who knows how many queries an agent gets. So I worked on my novel after I graduated from LSU, took some time off writing while I found a job, and I got married and moved back to California. So when I went back to my novel, I revised it a lot before I went looking for an agent. And when I did find an agent, I was lucky to find one who was very generous with her time. And, she was very honest with me. She was like, this is a real, like your voice is strong. I really like what you're doing here. But it could be scarier. It could be, I had this mystery at the heart surrounding the cabin, but it wasn't really a mystery all the way through. It was kind of a more magical realist story. And
mm,
she really encouraged me to try to bring in more thriller elements and try to just make it a more focused book. So I worked with her. It took almost 2 years to get to the draft where she was like, this is it. I think we're ready. And then she went out and sold it immediately. So I think it was
wow.
worth the wait of,
Yeah.
and it just made me a better writer.
Right.
I think that this is kind of an odd comparison, but I think that I and a lot of people do well with some parameters. As somebody who doesn't naturally gravitate towards a regular bedtime and wake up schedule, one of the most important things I've learned to do, just sort of as an adult, is to stick to a routine, to get up at a certain time, to go to sleep at a certain time, eat at a certain time. And I kind of feel the same way about writing a thriller, where, I was writing, but somehow having that structure allowed me to really, to just grow more as a writer and to tell a better story in the long run. So I think that's really helpful for me. And that ended up being one of the big things, I think, towards making this book, what it ultimately was.
Right. That's really interesting. So does that mean that you were really sort of more inclined to write in a magic realism kind of style, or were you more interested in writing a little bit of mystery, but more sort of romantic? Like, how were you imagining it to begin with?
I think I originally imagined it as magical realism, but as I wrote, I did find myself incorporating these little mysterious, scenes and eerie moments. Right. And I think that was because that's what I like to read. I mean, that's what I fell in love with reading, by reading these scary stories when I was growing up. So I think that I was naturally drawn to that kind of story, but somehow I didn't think I knew how to do it. I didn't really set out to write a thriller because I for some reason just wasn't sure that was something I could do. And I think my agent saying, like, you can, anybody can, it's just a matter of, incorporating tools. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that ended up being really huge for me. And the way I learned was I just went back and I read a lot of the books that I love. I read Gillian Flynn, I read Shirley Jackson, I read Patricia Highsmith, I read a lot of just the classics in that genre. And I took copious notes, like what are they doing at the end of every chapter? How are they misdirecting the reader? How does a red herring work? So a lot of what I did was kind of analytical in those 2 years, where I was figuring out what are the tools that this type of writer uses, right. And they aren't available to anyone. So yeah. It was really just a matter of learning those tools and then putting them into practice, into what I already had, and sort of reshaping it. It's sort of like the difference, I think, between having like a pudding and like a really nice Jell-O mold. It's the same ingredients, but I put it into kind of a structure.
Yeah. Oh. Well, it sounds fascinating, the whole process. And I think it's great that it took you a while to sharpen your tools, as well as sharpen your story and tighten it up and, push it towards a certain kind of mold, jelly or otherwise, So I love this, your main character, Maya, and how she's so unreliable, because not that she's an unreliable person, but she's an unreliable narrator, because she's coming off Klonopin. Is that the right way of saying it?
Yeah.
Klonopin. So this is a particular anti-anxiety medication that when you come off it abruptly, it does give you some kind of side effects which may play a role in the way you see reality of sorts. Is that right? And so we never know whether she's actually seeing things as they really are, or is it maybe a manifestation of her coming off this particular medication. So that was, I think, really clever. I understand that you had a situation like that in your own life that you pulled from.
Yeah. So when I was in my 20s, I was on Klonopin myself. I had gone to see a psychiatrist for depression and insomnia, which in retrospect, my insomnia was not that bad then. But he started me on an SSRI and also on Klonopin. And I took that for a number of years, every night, to help me fall asleep. And it works. It helps you sleep. But if you stop suddenly, you'll stop sleeping, and it brings about a lot of anxiety, and all the things that you started taking the Klonopin for have a way of coming back even stronger. So I had to stop rather suddenly because I had changed doctors, and the new doctor just didn't want to prescribe it to me and didn't believe that it needed to be sort of tapered off of. So I was dealing with this as I started writing my novel. And it just kind of found a way onto my page where I was trying to process it. And it turned out that writing about it was my way of processing it. I mean, it helped give me a sense of distance from it, where this was something that was happening to Maya, not to me. And it kind of helped me understand what I was going through in a way. And then that turned out to dovetail really nicely with the thriller genre, because as you mentioned, she is an unreliable narrator. And going through Klonopin withdrawal can make you feel very unreliable and very disoriented, because you're not sleeping. And the longer you go without sleep, the sort of more confused you get. So as the book started to develop, that ended up being perfect because it made sense. You know, I had this character who nobody believed, and going through Klonopin withdrawal was a great sort of way to make her to just sort of make her perception a little bit
Yeah.
shakier.
And also sympathetic. Like she was a sympathetic narrator or narrator. Sorry, it's an Australian and American thing. I
Oh,
got
yeah.
what's that narrator? Narrator. Yeah, it makes us sympathetic. So you immediately empathize with her. You want to believe her, but you know that well she hasn't slept, so maybe she's it's all in her head. So, but it must be such a thrill to have been to have been chosen by Reese Witherspoon, for your book to have been chosen. I mean, she's like an amazing powerhouse uh, person. She's not only a talented actress, but she's a producer. She's a book club whiz. She's got it all happening, and she's somebody that's really well respected. And I've loved her ever since I was a kid, you know, watching her movies. And she's just so personable and normal and easy to, you know, relate to, and so warm. And it must have been such a thrill. And especially, you know, when she's recommended all these other books that you absolutely love, and then she recommends your own. How did that feel when you got to
Oh,
speak to her?
it was just incredible. Like you said, she's read she several of her books last year just blew me away. So, including The Island of Missing Trees is probably the one that sticks out in my mind the most. And when I think of that writer, Elif Shafak,
Yeah.
she is one of my favorite writers. And so when I found out that Reese had chosen my book, it was so surreal. I was like, how can I possibly be in this club with my
Oh,
favorite writers? This is just it was so
yeah,
surreal.
yeah,
And it was really it was one of the best moments, you know, of my life when my editor called me and we had a Zoom,
yeah,
and she told me, and I just, you know, I had to pick my jaw up off the floor because it was so
yeah.
incredible.
Right. So how does that kind of work? Is it something that the editors put forward towards her people, or is it that her people go and hunt for new releases on their own? Like, is it something within the industry, or is that a secret that no one really should know about? Like, how does Reese Witherspoon come across your book? Does it?
Actually, I think it is a secret because I don't know. I didn't, you know, I had a lot of questions about the process, but I didn't push too hard in terms of like, how did she get my book? I know it was something to do with either, I don't know if my publisher went to her, if she went to, you know, Hello Sunshine went to them. I'm still
Right.
not totally sure how it came about. And it is very much shrouded in secrecy, which I think helps keep, you know, it's
Yeah.
exciting because they really don't want their books to get out before
Yes.
she has an announcement at the beginning of each month.
Yes.
So
And
there's a
it,
lot of
yeah.
secrecy.
Pardon me. Sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I'm just going to say, and it keeps the integrity of her selection intact, you see.
Yeah.
And also, how long did you have to keep it a secret before you were able to tell your family and friends?
It was several months and it was hard because I desperately wanted to tell everybody.
Yeah.
But you know, if that secret got out, that would really, like you're saying, that would really undermine the integrity of the
Right.
book club selection. So it was really hard not to tell people. I had to, you know, I had to bite my tongue and remind myself continuously not to tell anyone.
Oh my God, that would have been so hard, especially if you've gone to the movies and seen her in a movie, or, you know, like she's everywhere, you know, Instagram and all. You must have just been like biting your, you know, in it like a cheeks not to say anything.
Yeah, it was
Right.
tough. That was hard.
Yeah. So you're working on something now that's also in the mystery genre, or are you thinking of magic realism again, or?
It's also in the in the same sort of thriller genre, maybe a little bit more scarier. I wouldn't call it a horror novel, but I think that it sort of goes more in that direction or draws more from the horror genre. But yeah, it's in that same sort of space, and I'm just loving getting back into writing, because putting a book out is, there's a lot that goes with it, a lot of promotional stuff, and it's very exciting. So it's kind of hard to just settle down and write. But now I'm getting to the point where I'm getting back into it, and it's really enjoyable. And I feel like I've learned so much about writing a book that it just feels it's coming more easily now, and I don't expect this to take 7 years like the first one.
And you're also a writer. You're also a writing teacher yourself. So you're a creative writing teacher or tutor. How are you finding that? How long have you been doing that?
I've been doing that since 2017, and I'm actually taking a break now. This semester, I'm not teaching, so I can focus on writing and other things. Planning to move, so I just took a semester off. But teaching writing is, I think, just as helpful as taking writing classes. There's something about when you have to teach someone else something, you have to articulate it in a way that they understand, which forces you to articulate it to yourself. I think more deeply than you might otherwise if you weren't responsible for teaching it to someone else. So I think teaching writing was huge for me as I worked on this novel, because every week I'm helping students with their stories, and those same skills and sort of practices I'm taking back to my own work. And I think I think teaching writing is the best education for a writer.
Wow, that's amazing. And how did you get that position to begin with?
I have a friend who's really sort of a mentor. She's a woman who I've known for a long time, and she was leaving the job. And we were both sort of in the Santa Monica College community because of classes we had taken together. And so after I had my MFA and I was eligible to teach at that level, she invited me to take over her class. And yeah, the rest is history.
Wow, that must have been a bit scary, getting on the podium and getting started on a lesson of writing, and not, I don't know, I mean, I'm only imagining now how it might be for me, but surely it would have been extremely satisfying as well, seeing the results after a few weeks or months later.
Yeah, it was very satisfying. And it was a little bit challenging in that the students were older than me. So there was a sense of, I want to have, command of the classroom, as any teacher should. But I also recognize that these were people with a lot more life experience than me. And so there was sort of that beginning sort of, first few weeks where it's sort of figuring out, okay, how is this going to work? But once I got to know my students, I'm still really close to some of them. So I think that it ended up being really great ultimately for me as a writer, and also something I'll probably keep doing in the future. I really enjoy teaching writing.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. And just to conclude a little bit, who are your first readers when you've written something, whether it be a short story or a poem? Who do you like to give it to get a first impression?
Well, my husband's a screenwriter, and so he reads everything that I do. I read everything he does, and we're both sort of horror thriller people. So that's actually the first reader, but even before he reads something, we might be talking it out. We do a lot of problem solving together. So we were also working on a screenplay together. So we're very involved in each other's writing lives. And then I also have a writers group that I've been with for 7 years. The group's been around for 10 years. So we're a writers group, but we're also really good friends. And they probably read 10 drafts of this novel, not the whole thing, but different parts of it, of The House in the Pines. So when the book came out, it felt like a celebration for all of us with the whole group.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. So my husband and my writers group, and then my
That's wonderful. So I could just imagine the party that went on when it was published.
Yeah, it was great. One of the women in my writers group, she had a cake made with Reese Witherspoon's face on it, holding my book. So that was incredible.
Yeah, That's one of the cakes that you really want to plow into, I'm sure.
Yeah.
That's terrific. Oh, that's great. So now you're working on something as well in the thriller mystery slash horror genre. Do you think that you'll always be sticking to this particular sort of style of storytelling, or do you think you might go into short storytelling or romance or
I think I'll
poetry?
always tell this kind of story because it's the kind of story I like to read.
Yeah.
And it also I just sort of like having a set of like sort of parameters. It just gives me a sense of I can do anything I want, but if I stick to these parameters, what I write will turn into something recognizable to other people. So
Yeah.
I think I probably will stick in this genre.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, it's been such a pleasure chatting to you today, Anna, and thank you so much for uh, telling us about your experience with writing your book and your whole writing journey. And we just wish you the very, very best of luck for the House on
Thank
the
you so
Pines
much.
and for anything else that you write in the future. We'll be waiting with bated breath to read it in the future or any other thing that you'd like to write. So thank you once again. Authorlink thanks you, and so do our readers, and we'll hopefully see you soon.